Dark Carnival is one of the most divisive campaigns in Left 4 Dead 2. You either swear by it, or you leave the lobby the second someone picks it. It has long, cluttered roadways, the scenic motel stop, the slip and slide of doom, the chaotic carousel alarm event, and of course, the romantic, all-inclusive tunnel of love. All of it gives Dark Carnival a personality no other campaign really matches. But what if I told you Dark Carnival wasn't supposed to look like this at all? Today, we're diving into the cut Dark Carnival content and reconstructing the campaign we almost got. A quick disclaimer before we get into the video: the map I'm using in the footage is not an official remake of the cut Dark Carnival map. It's a community reconstruction called Dark Carnival Remix, so please understand it's not 100% accurate, but it is still pretty close to the original version of Dark Carnival. And with that being said, let's get into the map. It's clear that during the development of Dark Carnival, something shifted and players began to speculate the original campaign was so disturbing that Valve had to rework it. Because Dark Carnival in its early form wasn't chaotic, it was mournful, and it didn't feel like a celebration interrupted by infection. It felt like something America loved quietly rotting, and that tone may have been too heavy for a campaign already known for its length and pacing. So Valve tightened it. They condensed it, and they amplified the spectacle, and slowly, horror gave way to theatrics. Originally, the campaign began on a far more open roadway. Searchlights cut across the sky in the distance. As you approached the motel, it felt frozen in time. Military vehicles and buses crowd the parking lot, not like a festival overflow, but like an evacuation that failed, as if they were preparing for something they stood no chance against. The motel was originally much larger. The motel was clearly used as an attempt at evacuation, but the absence of CETA signals that it never came close to materializing. In many of the hotel rooms, you can find holes in the ceiling, presumably from the infected clawing their way through the drywall. You can also find the site of a massacre. It's in a similar position in the current build of the map, but it seems they toned down the violence just a little bit. There are far less corpses in the room. This isn't necessarily important to the atmosphere, but there was originally a laundry room in the middle of the motel, which actually makes sense. People do need to do laundry at a motel, I think. There is also a playground behind the motel that is absent in the current game. There is an entire part of the motel next to some sort of office, assumably the place people bought rooms at. It's filled with corpses, implying that people were gathering in the office, most likely to reach out to their families or figure out the situation. As you exit the motel, you'll notice a large view of an open field, similar to the hill drop in the current build. However, it's no longer a point of no return. You can simply walk back up the hill if someone gets grabbed. There is a dramatically shorter water section, which in my opinion would have been a plus. Who likes walking through the water at like 2% speed? Actually nobody. The end of the first chapter is dramatically different. The parking lot has more fencing, there are more Humvees, and there is the entire Midnight Riders tour bus just sitting there. You'll also notice a highway just off to the side, meaning that the amusement park is not far off the main road like in the current version. For what it's worth, it makes no sense to have a road running over an amusement park, so I do understand why this was cut. But that's kind of the pattern here. Early Dark Carnival wasn't unrealistic. It was just bigger, slower, and messier. It felt like a place that existed before the outbreak, not a map built for infected. Because once you actually enter the amusement park in the cut version, that's when things really start to shift. Instead of immediately feeling like you've stepped into a zombie playground built specifically to ruin your versus run, it feels like you've walked into something that was mid-preparation. There's a stairwell leading up into the park, fencing that looks hastily thrown together, a single generator light shining down the stairs like someone was still working here when everything went wrong. flowing. It doesn't feel theatrical, it feels interrupted, and that's a huge tonal difference. The first section inside the park is noticeably more contained. There's an alleyway behind the ticket booth instead of just an open lot. It feels tighter, less like a combat arena and more like an actual backstage area. Kiddieland in this version was originally one single building, located near the front of the park. Obviously, as you venture deeper, there are more rides geared towards children, but this is just the opening portion, which is interesting because that alone makes it feel more believable, like it was actually designed by humans instead of by a level designer thinking, where can I spawn a hunter? And something subtle but important, a lot of the booths have their shutters closed, which sounds like nothing, but visually, it changes everything. Closed shutters makes it feel like the park shut down normally, not exploded into chaos. There aren't piles of bodies everywhere, there aren't military barricades every 5 feet, it's just empty, and that emptiness is uncomfortable. The shooting gallery is still there, so don't worry, you can absolutely still sabotage your team if you want, but even that feels slightly less exaggerated. As you move deeper into the park, you find Mustachio's strength test, except in the early build, it's dismantled in a back room, which is honestly kind of creepy. When it speaks, the audio sounds distorted, like it's broken or like it's been left on for days. And that's something the final version doesn't really do. The warehouse section was also much wider originally. There are unused rooms, 2 exits that are hilariously like 5 feet apart from each other, so not a massive gameplay difference, but the space itself feels less claustrophobic. Then you hit the ramp section, and yes, it's still there, but it's wider, less steep, and slightly more forgiving, which probably means Coach isn't rolling down it like a bowling ball every time someone gets charged. Then we get into the second half of Kiddieland, and this is where the early build really shines. Side by side, you can see the difference immediately. The cut version feels like a functioning amusement park. There are more coasters visible, more rides, and more structures filling the skyline. It feels like it was actually designed for families. The final version? It's functional, but it kind of feels like 3 rides dropped into an empty field. The early version feels like somewhere kids would actually beg their parents to take them, and that contrast makes the emptiness hit harder. There's even a water slide section where the water is actually flowing, which is such a small detail, but it reinforces the idea that this wasn't a war zone. It was a normal day until it wasn't. And that's the tone early Dark Carnival leans into. You pass the taco bucket, which is still the greatest restaurant name ever conceived, and something else stands out. There again aren't that many bodies, which is weird because you'd expect carnage, but instead it just feels abandoned, like people left fast, not violently, just fast. Then we hit the Carousel event, and I'll be honest, I think the live build did this one better mechanically. In the cut version, you basically walk around a tiny fenced section, trigger the event, and run to the safe room, except there's no real reason you can't just, I don't know, climb over parts of it, which makes it feel slightly unfinished, but thematically, it still feels less exaggerated. Then we get to the Tunnel of Love, and this is where things get interesting. In the early build, it's dramatically shorter. You walk down a hallway, hit a maintenance shaft, pop back into the tunnel for a few seconds, and you're out. And from a pacing standpoint, short and sweet might have been amazing. From a chaos standpoint, yeah, it's definitely less brutal, but again, that's the difference. The final version is built for tension. The early version feels like a real place. Even the roof drop after the tunnel is larger, easier to navigate, and less of a death funnel. Then we reach one of the biggest differences, the roller coaster event. In the cut version, it's actually reversed. You ascend from what is normally the descent path, and you start at the control booth instead of some random side gate. And most importantly, there's a house in the middle of the event that's actually accessible, which is huge. Because in the live version, the coaster is where teams die. There's nowhere to breathe and nowhere to reset. It's just Panic Sprint Simulator. But the early build gives you a moment, a break, a checkpoint within the chaos. That alone changes the entire feel of the event. Now, would that have made versus easier? Absolutely. Would Chargers have had a field day with some of these railless sections? Also yes. So again, I understand the adjustments, but it's fascinating to see how different the philosophy was. After the coaster, you pass through fencing and hit the safe room. And I don't know how to explain it, but the safe room just feels more organic. Less you completed the obstacle and more you survived this part of the park. Part 4 flips things again. You start in the bumper cars arena and work outward. The barn is reduced to a single line of stalls. You pass through a games building filled with pool tables, and the transitions between indoor and outdoor spaces feel significantly more natural and less segmented. Then we reach the scenic park area, and this is where early Dark Carnival might have been at its strongest. It's quiet, dark, and desolate. You can picture couples taking photos in the gazebo, high school kids hanging out by the Ferris wheel, and now it's just empty. No massive piles of bodies, and no over-the-top destruction. Just an unending, unwavering silence. The Ferris wheel is actually visible, not buried in fog, and not just background dressing. You run under it, and it feels important. And instead of the turnstile crescendo we got, which I still question to this day, you have a Ferris wheel focused event. It feels intentional, and the safe room afterward, it's elevated. The room is 2 levels, and it feels like something desperate people threw together, not a standardized zombie bunker. And then we get to the finale. Originally, it began with collecting gas cans to power a generator that moved a monorail. It's functional, but not exactly thrilling. There were also multiple escape concepts floating around during development. One involved the Midnight Riders tour bus, another involved a train, which many players connect to Swamp Fever's opening, since that campaign begins on a train. There's no official confirmation that the train rescue was canon, but fans have recreated what that footage might look like. Which means at some point that was at least considered. And instead we got the stadium concert holdout. Fireworks, music, helicopter rescue. It's iconic, it's loud, and it is Left 4 Dead 2. But it's not subtle. And that's the key difference. Early Dark Carnival feels like a place America abandoned. Final Dark Carnival feels like the apocalypse throwing a concert. Neither is bad, but they are completely different moods, and I can't help but wonder if Valve had leaned into that quieter, more mournful tone, would Dark Carnival feel less divisive today? Would it feel more like Left 4 Dead 1, or would everyone just complain that it was too slow? We'll never know, but somewhere in early development, there was a version of this campaign where the lights were still on, the water was still running, and the park hadn't fully turned into a stage. And that is the Dark Carnival we almost got. But maybe the more interesting question isn't what we lost, it's why it changed in the first place. Because when you look at early Dark Carnival, it almost feels like it belongs in Left 4 Dead 1. It's quieter, heavier, and more grounded. It feels like an American landmark that got abandoned midday. The water's still running, the rides are still intact, the shutters are down like the park just closed early. It doesn't feel like a battlefield. It feels like something that was interrupted, and that tone is very different from what Left 4 Dead 2 eventually became. Left 4 Dead 1 always felt desperate. No Mercy is a hospital collapse. Death Toll feels isolated and rural. Blood Harvest feels quiet and uneasy. Left 4 Dead 2, it's louder, it's brighter, and it's exaggerated. You've got a mall evacuation, a swamp chase, a plantation siege, and a rock concert finale. All of the campaigns in Left 4 Dead 2 lean into spectacle, and I think Dark Carnival changing during development is a perfect example of that shift. The early build feels more realistic, but the final version feels more memorable. When people think of Dark Carnival, they don't think about the laundry room. They think about the roller coaster sprint, the fireworks, and the midnight riders blasting music while infected flood the stage. It's chaos, and chaos is exciting. Realism doesn't always win. Pacing wins, flow wins, and moments win. And I think Valve finally realized that, because a slower, more atmospheric Dark Carnival might have been powerful, but would it have been as replayable? Would Versus players have loved it, or would people have called it boring? We don't know, but what we do know is that Valve didn't just cut content. They reshaped the campaign to fit the identity of Left 4 Dead 2. They traded mourning for momentum, they traded realism for rhythm, and maybe that's why Dark Carnival is still one of the most talked about campaigns in the game. Because even in its final form, it's loud, it's messy, and it's divisive, but it's unforgettable. And somewhere in those early builds, there's a version of this map where the apocalypse hadn't turned into a show yet. And honestly, I kind of wish we could have played it. And if you made it this far, seriously, thank you guys. I know this one was a bit longer, but I love digging into this kind of stuff. The cut content, the early builds, and the versions of the maps we never got to fully experience. If you enjoy these deep dives into Left 4 Dead, the weird development history, the little details people overlook, please let me know down below. There is a lot more hiding in this game. If you want to talk about it with me directly, the Discord is also linked in the description below, and we've got a bunch of people who are way too passionate about zombie games, so you'll fit right in. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, you already know what to do. It helps more than you think, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.